The Cromar 7 station, a colossal structure floating in the distant reaches of space, hummed with activity. Its metallic walls reflected the cold starlight from the far-off stars, casting eerie glows across the vast hallways. This research station was a symbol of the Cromar 7's technological prowess, a race of aliens who had mastered the art of space travel but had always remained curious about the human species. They had watched Earth for years, observing humanity from the shadows of their distant world. But now, they were ready to meet humans face to face. Captain Jack Walker, a seasoned explorer with the United Earth Coalition, was nervous as he stepped off the transport ship. His team had been sent on a diplomatic mission to negotiate a trade agreement with the Cromar 7. It was a chance to foster peace between the two species, and Jack had been chosen for his charisma and level-headed nature. But the Cromar 7 were unlike anything he'd encountered before. Towering, six-limbed beings with blue skin and eyes that glowed like distant stars. They were both awe-inspiring and intimidating. As Jack made his way through the sleek, sterile hallways of the station, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his mission. The Cromar 7 had much to offer in terms of technology, but Jack knew they wanted something in return. The humans had always been cautious, wary of alien species that could be more interested in exploitation than cooperation. Jack's instincts told him that this mission could either be a breakthrough for humanity, or it could end in disaster. When he entered the meeting room, he found himself standing before an array of alien delegates, their six eyes watching him intently. At the center of the group stood Valera, the lead researcher of the Cromar 7. She was smaller than the others, but her presence was magnetic. Her deep, sapphire skin shimmered under the fluorescent lights, and her four arms rested gracefully by her sides. Her eyes locked onto Jack with an intensity that made him uneasy. She was clearly in charge here. "Captain Walker," Valera said, her voice smooth and calming, though there was an edge to it. "It's an honor to meet you. Your species has intrigued us for some time." Jack offered a polite smile, doing his best to appear confident. "The pleasure's mine. We've been watching your progress from Earth. We're excited to be here." Valera tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "We've been watching you as well. There is much about your species we don't understand. Your biology, for one." Jack blinked, slightly taken aback. "Our biology." He had been prepared for talk of trade and technology, not a conversation about his body. "Yes," Valera said, her voice softening but still laced with curiosity. "We have studied the anatomy of many species in the galaxy. But humans, you are different. There's something unique about you." Jack shifted uncomfortably, sensing that this conversation was heading in an unexpected direction. "I'm not sure what you mean." Valera's eyes glinted with interest, and she took a step closer to him. "You are biologically fascinating. Specifically, your males." She paused, looking him over in a way that made him uneasy. "You humans possess two testicles." Jack froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. Yes," he said slowly, trying to process what she was implying. "That's true. Most males do." The room fell silent. The Cromar 7 delegates exchanged glances, their six eyes wide with interest. Jack could feel the weight of their gaze on him, as if they were all trying to decipher the secret of humanity's anatomy. Valera, however, seemed particularly fascinated, her head tilting slightly as she studied him. "Our males only have one," Valera continued, her voice almost whispering. "It's an interesting difference, don't you think?" Jack shifted on his feet, unsure whether he should be embarrassed or simply confused. "I guess so." Valera smiled, her sharp teeth just barely visible as she did. This excites me." Jack's confusion deepened. He could feel the temperature in the room shift, as though the air had thickened with unspoken tension. Valera's fascination was no longer just about biology. It was personal. The way she looked at him, the way her voice had softened, made it clear that her interest in him went beyond scientific inquiry. The silence stretched on for a few moments, and Jack cleared his throat. attempting to regain his composure. Well, I'm sure we can discuss that later. We're here to talk about the trade agreement, right? Valera didn't break her gaze. Yes, she replied softly, of course. But I believe we will have much more to discuss in the days ahead. You've piqued my curiosity, Captain Walker. Her words sent a shiver down his spine. Jack knew there was more to this mission than he had originally thought. The Chromar 7 were advanced, yes, but they were also driven by an intense, almost obsessive curiosity about humanity, about Jack specifically. He wasn't sure whether to be flattered or frightened. As the meeting continued, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the true purpose of this mission was far from what it seemed. Valera's fascination with his anatomy had only just begun. He wondered what other surprises the Chromar 7 had in store for him. And more importantly, what did they want from humanity? The next day, Jack woke up early, feeling the weight of the mission pressing down on him. His quarters on the Chromar 7 station were sleek and high-tech, a far cry from the rough accommodations he was used to on Earth. But despite the luxury, sleep had been elusive. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way Valera had looked at him the day before, the curiosity in her eyes, had unsettled him. It was clear that the Chromar 7 were interested in human biology, but Jack wasn't sure whether it was just for scientific research or something more. After a quick breakfast, Jack made his way to the main conference room, where another round of discussions was scheduled. The room was filled with Chromar 7 delegates and Earth representatives, but there was no sign of Valera yet. Jack took his seat, trying to focus on the negotiations at hand. He knew the stakes were high. The Chromar 7 were offering technology that could change the future of humanity, but what did they want in return? Jack's mind kept returning to Valera's strange fascination with human anatomy, especially the topic of his two testicles. As the meeting began, Jack tried to push those thoughts aside and focus on the task at hand. But it wasn't easy. Valera soon entered the room, her graceful, six-limbed form catching everyone's attention. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the room before landing on Jack. Her gaze lingered a little longer than it should have, and Jack couldn't ignore the way her lips curled into a faint smile as she approached. Captain Walker. She greeted him, her voice smooth as ever. I trust you slept well. Jack nodded, doing his best to hide his unease. Yes, thank you. Ready for today's discussions. Valera's smile widened slightly, but there was a spark of something else in her eyes, a glint of something more than professionalism. Jack couldn't quite place it, but it made him uncomfortable. The meeting began, but Jack found it hard to concentrate. Valera seemed unusually focused on him, asking him questions about human physiology that went beyond the usual diplomatic pleasantries. She seemed genuinely fascinated by everything he said. How humans could survive in different environments, how Earth had adapted to various challenges. Everything seemed to come back to human resilience. But then, during a break, Valera asked him a question that caught him off guard. Captain, may I ask something personal? Her voice was quiet, almost conspiratorial. Jack raised an eyebrow, not sure what to expect. Of course. What's on your mind? Valera leaned in slightly, her eyes locked on his with an intensity that made him feel vulnerable. You said yesterday that humans have two testicles, but how does that work? What is their purpose, exactly? Jack blinked, not sure whether to laugh or be shocked. It was a personal question, but the way she asked it was far from casual. There was a strange curiosity behind it, like she was trying to understand a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Well, Jack began, trying to remain calm. They're part of our reproductive system. They're responsible for producing sperm and hormones. But to be honest, I never really thought much about it. Valera's gaze didn't leave him. She seemed to be taking in every word carefully, as though it was the most important thing she had ever heard. Fascinating. She murmured, more to herself than to him. Your species has so much that we do not understand. Before Jack could respond, one of the other delegates approached, signaling that it was time to resume the meeting. Valera's eyes flickered toward the delegate, but then returned to Jack for just a moment longer. The look in her eyes was different now, softer, almost intimate. "I look forward to our next conversation," she said, her voice low. Jack nodded, still trying to process everything. What was going on? Was this just scientific curiosity, or was there something more at play here? He had dealt with diplomats and leaders before, but never an alien species that seemed so intrigued by him on such a personal level. As the meeting resumed, Jack couldn't focus. He kept thinking about Valera's questions, the way she'd looked at him, and the odd tension that had built between them. It wasn't just about human biology anymore. There was something deeper, something that made Jack feel both flattered and uneasy. Later that evening, Jack found himself walking through the station's vast corridors, his mind racing. He was heading back to his quarters when he saw Valera again. This time, she wasn't surrounded by the other delegates. She was alone, standing by one of the large observation windows, gazing out at the stars. Her posture was relaxed, but there was something about her that seemed more vulnerable, almost wistful. "Captain Walker," she said, her voice breaking the silence as he approached. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. You are different from what I expected." Jack stopped a few feet away, unsure how to respond. Different how? Valera turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. "You're strong, yes, but it's more than that. You have a resilience, a drive that I don't see in most other species. It's impressive." Jack's heart raced. He wasn't sure if she was complimenting him or if she was just fascinated by his biology. Either way, it was clear that Valera's interest in him wasn't just academic anymore. He could feel the tension building between them, thickening the air around them. "You know," Valera continued, her voice softer now, "I've studied countless species in my life, but none have intrigued me like humans. None have fascinated me as much as you do, Captain Walker." Jack's mind was spinning. Was she flirting with him? He wasn't sure what to make of it. But as he looked into her eyes, he could see that her curiosity was genuine. She wasn't just studying him. She was drawn to him. For a moment, the two of them stood in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily between them. Jack didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure if he was ready to dive deeper into whatever this was, but something about Valera's presence made it hard to walk away. "Well," Jack finally said, breaking the silence, "I guess we'll see where this goes." Valera smiled again, her eyes gleaming with something that felt both like hope and something else, something far more dangerous. "Yes, Captain. We shall see." The days that followed were a blur of diplomatic discussions and strange, lingering moments between Jack and Valera. The mission was progressing smoothly on the surface. Talks of trade, technology, and cooperation filled the air. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else going on. The Chromar 7 seemed genuinely interested in helping humanity, offering advanced tech that could revolutionize Earth's energy and defense systems. But Jack's mind kept circling back to Valera, her personal questions, and the way she seemed so fixated on him. On the third day, after another round of official meetings, Jack found himself alone again in one of the station's observation rooms. The Chromar 7 station, though vast and functional, had a few spots that offered incredible views of the star-filled void. It was one of these rooms that Jack often retreated to think and clear his head. It was peaceful here, but the quiet was always followed by a certain tension. Tension that only grew whenever Valera appeared. Jack stood by the large glass window, looking out at the swirling galaxies far beyond. The stars glistened like diamonds in the endless black, and for a moment, Jack felt small, insignificant even. The vastness of space had a way of reminding him how fragile life could be, and yet humanity had managed to survive, grow, and thrive despite all odds. He could see how that might impress an alien race. But that wasn't what had his mind occupied right now. It was Valera. The last few days had been filled with fleeting moments, long, intense stares, her subtle touches when passing by, and most notably, her questions. They had started off simple enough. What was the human reproductive process like? How did the two-testicle thing work? And so on. But each question felt more personal, as though she was trying to understand not just his body, but him. Jack shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. He wasn't sure what to think anymore. Were the Chromar 7 just conducting research, or was Valera interested in him? He had always known that humans would be subject to alien curiosity, but he hadn't expected it to feel so personal. He was still lost in his thoughts when the door behind him slid open. He turned, his heart beating faster when he saw Valera entering the room. She was alone, her 4 arms folding gracefully behind her back as she moved toward him. Her expression was calm, but there was an undeniable spark in her eyes that caught Jack off guard. "Captain Walker," she greeted, her voice a soft melody in the otherwise silent room. "I thought I might find you here." Jack gave her a small smile. "I needed some time to think. It's a lot to process." Valera nodded, her gaze flicking toward the stars outside. "I understand. The unknown can be overwhelming." She took a step closer, her presence filling the space. "But sometimes the unknown is enticing, don't you think?" Jack's breath caught in his throat at her words. The way she spoke, so softly and yet with such certainty, made it hard to focus. He wasn't sure if she was talking about the mission or something else entirely. "Enticing," he repeated, his voice low. "What do you mean?" Valera's eyes didn't leave him as she took another step closer. "I mean you, Captain. Humans. You're unlike anything I've ever encountered." Her words sent a strange shiver down Jack's spine. This wasn't about trade or technology anymore. This was something else, something that made his heart race and his thoughts scatter. "I don't know what you're trying to say," Jack said, his voice a little unsteady. Valera stopped just a few feet away, her glowing blue eyes locking with his. "I think you do, Captain. There's something about you that intrigues me, not just your biology, but who you are. Your resilience, your spirit. It's unlike anything I've ever seen in any species." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You're more than just a specimen to be studied. You're fascinating." Jack's mind was spinning. He had never felt this way around someone, alien or human. He knew she was different, and the way she spoke to him was unlike anything he had expected from an alien diplomat. But the truth was, he wasn't sure what she wanted from him. Was this a cultural misunderstanding, or was there something more happening here? "I'm not sure I understand," Jack admitted, his voice a little strained. "You seem interested in humans, but I thought we were here for the trade agreement." Valera tilted her head, her 6 eyes reflecting the light in strange ways. "Oh, Captain Walker," she said softly, "I am interested in much more than trade. But I do not know how to explain it. We Chromar 7 have studied many species, but none have affected me like this. Your species, your humans, are not like the others. You have a drive, a passion that is rare. And you, Captain, you carry that more than most." Jack felt an uncomfortable warmth spread across his chest. She was speaking to him with a kind of reverence, as if he were something greater than just a human diplomat. But what did it mean? Was she just complimenting him, or was there something deeper behind her words? The tension between them was palpable now, and Jack wasn't sure how to break it. Valera took another small step forward, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not just fascinated by your biology, Captain. I'm fascinated by you." There it was again, those words. It was impossible to ignore the way she was looking at him, the way her words made his heart race. Jack swallowed hard, his mind racing to make sense of everything. He had expected diplomacy, trade, and technology. But this was new. This was dangerous. I don't know what to say," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. Valera's expression softened, and she reached out, her hand hovering near his arm. "You don't have to say anything, Captain. I just wanted you to know that I see you. I understand you." Jack felt the pull of her gaze, the warmth of her presence, and for a moment, he considered letting himself fall into it. But he quickly reminded himself of his duty, of the mission, the stakes, and the dangers of getting too close to someone like Valera. "Valera," he said, taking a step back, "I think we should stick to the agreement. We need to keep things professional." Her eyes flickered, and for the briefest moment, Jack thought he saw a flicker of disappointment in them. But then she smiled, the same soft, knowing smile that both intrigued and unsettled him. "Of course, Captain," she replied, her voice barely audible. "Professional." Jack turned and walked toward the door, his thoughts swirling as he stepped into the hallway. He couldn't help but feel like the tension between him and Valera was far from over. Something had shifted between them, and he wasn't sure where it would lead. The mission was far from finished, and the future, both for humanity and for him, felt uncertain. The following days aboard the Cromar 7 station were filled with the usual diplomatic meetings, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was growing between him and Valera. The talks about trade and technology continued, but they seemed to blur into the background as Jack found himself thinking more and more about her. The way she looked at him, the way she spoke, it was hard to ignore. She wasn't just interested in humanity as a species. She was interested in him. At first, Jack tried to push his thoughts aside. He had a mission to complete after all. The future of Earth depended on the success of this negotiation. But every time Valera appeared in the room, every time her voice brushed against his ear, he couldn't help but feel a pull. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and though he knew he should keep his distance, part of him couldn't resist the growing temptation. On the 5th day, Jack was again in one of the observation rooms, looking out at the stars. His mind raced, trying to piece everything together. The Cromar 7 were offering incredible technology, energy sources that could power entire planets, advanced weaponry that would give humanity a significant edge. It was a dream for Earth, a chance to leap ahead in the galaxy's technological race. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the Cromar 7's interest in humanity than just trade. A soft sound behind him made him turn, and there she was again. Valera. Her movements were graceful as she stepped into the room, her 6 eyes fixed on him as she approached. The air between them felt thick, charged with the unspoken words that neither of them had dared to voice. "Captain Walker," she said, her voice as smooth as silk. "I was hoping to find you here." Jack nodded, trying to keep his composure. "I seem to spend a lot of time in these rooms." Valera's lips curved into a smile, and her eyes glinted. "I can understand why. The stars, they're mesmerizing, aren't they?" Jack glanced out the window, but he didn't see the stars. Not really. All he could focus on was Valera, the way she looked at him, the way she made him feel. "Yes," he said slowly, "they are." Valera took a step closer, her 4 arms folding behind her in a calm, almost regal posture. "You know, Captain," she began, her voice low, "I've been thinking a lot about our conversations, about your species, and about you." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had expected the usual diplomatic small talk, but Valera's words felt different. They felt personal. "I've always known that humans are a resilient species," Valera continued, her gaze unwavering. "You've survived against all odds. You're capable of more than I ever imagined. But it's more than just your survival, isn't it? It's your spirit." Jack swallowed hard, trying to keep his emotions in check. "Our spirit." Valera nodded, her expression softening. "Yes. You humans, you have something that most species in the galaxy do not. A drive, a need to push beyond your limits, to achieve greatness even in the face of the unknown." She paused, stepping even closer. "And you, Captain. You embody that better than anyone I've met." Her words were like a warm breeze, but also a weight. It wasn't just admiration she was showing. It was something more, something deeper. Jack could feel it in his chest, like a rising tide threatening to pull him under. "You've been watching us," Jack said, his voice rough. "You've studied us. But you're still not sure about us, are you?" Valera's expression shifted, her eyes darkening with something like hunger. "I know more than you think, Captain. I know that humans are capable of extraordinary things. But you're different. You're a part of something bigger, something I haven't fully figured out yet." Jack could feel his pulse quicken. It was hard to breathe with her so close. He wasn't sure if she was talking about the mission or something far more personal. "I'm just a man, Valera," Jack said, his voice almost a whisper. "I'm nothing special." Valera's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Oh, Captain Walker, you are far more than that. Don't you see? You're the key to understanding your species, to understanding humans." Jack's mind was spinning. Her words were like a web, pulling him in with every syllable. He knew he had to stay focused. This mission was too important to let emotions get in the way. But the way Valera was looking at him made it harder and harder to think clearly. There was no mistaking it now. She wasn't just interested in humanity. She was interested in him. Before he could say anything, Valera reached out and gently touched his arm. Her skin was warm, and the touch sent a shiver through him. "Captain, I've told you before. I am fascinated by you, not just as a human, but as you. The way you think, the way you feel. There's so much more to you than you realize." Jack's breath caught in his throat. He should pull away. He should back off. But he couldn't move. Her words, her presence, it was all too much. It felt like she was drawing him in with an invisible force. Jack started, but his voice faltered. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to explain the storm of thoughts and feelings crashing inside him. Valera smiled again, her eyes gleaming. "You don't have to say anything, Captain. Not yet." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the station and the distant whispers of the stars outside. The tension between them was palpable, like a charge building, ready to explode. Finally, Valera pulled her hand back, her gaze lingering on Jack for a moment longer. "I should go," she said softly, though her voice lacked the usual authority. There was something different about it now, almost like regret. Jack didn't know whether to feel relieved or disappointed, but before he could say anything, she was already turning to leave, her steps light and graceful as she disappeared into the hallway. Jack stood there for a long time, his mind racing. The words she had spoken, the way she had touched him, it was all too much. Was this part of the mission? Was this just curiosity? Or was there something deeper, something neither of them was ready to admit? The stars outside the window seemed distant now, and Jack couldn't help but feel that the unknown was closing in on him from all sides. There was no going back now. Something had changed, and the path ahead was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. The next few days aboard the Cromar 7 station were a blur. Jack couldn't focus on the mission as much as he should have. He kept replaying the moments with Valera, the way she spoke to him, the way she looked at him with such intensity. Every time they crossed paths, the air around them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. It was clear now. This was more than just diplomacy. Something had shifted between them, and Jack wasn't sure if it was for the better. The meetings with the Cromar 7 officials continued, but Jack found himself distracted. Valera's words from their last conversation echoed in his mind. "You're different, Captain. You embody your species better than anyone I've met." Was it a compliment, or was there more to it? The truth was, Jack didn't know how to interpret her feelings. Was she just fascinated by humans? Or was it something deeper? Something about him? On the 7th day, Jack was once again alone in the observation room, trying to clear his thoughts. The station's view of the stars had always been calming, but today it did nothing to quiet his mind. He leaned against the window, looking out into the vast, empty space. His thoughts were still tangled in confusion, the pull between duty and desire growing stronger each day. Was it wrong to feel something for Valera? After all, they were from two completely different worlds. As if on cue, the door slid open behind him. Jack didn't turn around at first, unsure if it was just another routine visit or if it was her. But then he heard the soft footsteps, and he didn't need to look to know it was Valera. "Captain Walker," she said softly, her voice as melodic as ever. "I see you're thinking again." Jack turned, his eyes locking with hers. "I can't seem to stop. These days have been strange." Valera smiled slightly, her expression unreadable. "I understand. Change can be unsettling, but sometimes change brings new understanding." She walked toward him, the sound of her 4 feet against the floor oddly graceful. There was something in the way she moved that drew Jack in, something hypnotic. He had always admired how different her species was, how elegant and powerful. But there was something else now. He wasn't just admiring her. He was feeling her presence, in a way that he couldn't ignore. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Jack began, his voice steady but his heart racing, "about how we're different from other species." Valera's eyes flickered with something like curiosity. "And what have you decided?" "I don't know yet," Jack said, his brow furrowed in confusion. "But I can't stop thinking about you." The words were out before he even realized it. He hadn't meant to say them, but the truth had slipped from his mouth before he could stop it. The silence that followed was thick and charged. Jack's heart beat faster, and he could see the way Valera's eyes softened at his words. "You're not just curious about humanity, are you?" Jack said quietly, taking a step closer to her. "You're curious about me." Valera didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward as well, closing the distance between them. For a moment, Jack thought she might say something, but instead, she simply reached out and placed a hand on his chest. The touch was light, but it sent a jolt of electricity through him. "Captain," she said softly, her voice now barely above a whisper, "I told you before, I am fascinated by you. But it's more than that. You and your kind are different. Your spirit, your heart, it's unlike anything I've ever seen in the galaxy." Jack's breath caught in his throat. Her words were both a compliment and a challenge, and he wasn't sure how to respond. He had always prided himself on his discipline, his ability to separate emotions from duty. But with Valera so close, it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain that distance. "I don't know what you want from me," Jack admitted, his voice shaky despite himself. "You're not just studying us anymore. You want something else." Valera's gaze never wavered. She was so close now that Jack could feel the warmth radiating from her body. Her 6 eyes studied him with an intensity that made his heart race. "Maybe what I want is not something you can understand, Captain," she said, her voice low and inviting. "But that doesn't mean it's not real. There's something between us. Something powerful." Jack felt the tension between them grow, thick as the space surrounding them. It was a pull that he couldn't explain, couldn't resist. Everything inside him screamed to stay professional, to remember why he was here. But the way she looked at him, the way her hand rested against his chest, it was impossible to ignore. "Valera," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what this is, but I can't keep pretending it's nothing." Valera didn't reply at first. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she took a step back, her hand sliding from his chest. The loss of contact left Jack feeling strangely empty, as though he had been pulled back from the edge of something. "We're from different worlds, Captain," she said softly. "Our paths were never meant to cross like this. But perhaps we are not so different after all." Jack shook his head, trying to make sense of her words. "What are you saying?" Valera's eyes softened, and for a moment, she looked almost vulnerable. "I don't know what will happen between us, but I feel it, Captain. I feel it every time you're near me." For a moment, the room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in on him. The pull between them was undeniable now. Jack wasn't sure if it was the attraction he felt or the mission pressing down on him, but it was all becoming too much to handle. I don't know what to do with this," Jack confessed, his voice strained. Valera gave him a small, sad smile. "Sometimes, Captain, you don't have to know. You just have to let it happen." Jack stood there, frozen, his mind a whirlwind of confusion, desire, and duty. Valera was right. They were from different worlds, different species, with different lives, different goals. But in that moment, none of that seemed to matter. What mattered was the connection they shared, a connection neither of them fully understood but couldn't deny. Valera took one last look at him before turning to leave. "I will let you think, Captain. But know this, what we have is not over. It's only just begun." As she walked away, Jack was left standing in the room, his heart pounding. The future felt uncertain, but one thing was clear. Everything had changed. The days passed slowly, each one stretching out longer than the last. Jack had tried to focus on his duties, talks with the Chromar 7, strategizing with his crew, but nothing seemed to hold his attention the way it used to. He couldn't escape the thoughts of Valera. She had become an enigma in his mind, a mystery he couldn't quite unravel. Every time they crossed paths, the connection between them seemed to deepen, yet neither of them spoke about it directly. It was like a game, one that Jack wasn't sure if he wanted to win or lose. The feeling in the air was different now. Every glance, every word exchanged between them seemed to carry more weight. Jack found himself watching her every time she entered a room. The way she moved, the way her eyes locked onto his, it was impossible to ignore. Yet he knew that he couldn't let this distraction consume him, not with the future of humanity on the line. He had a mission to complete. The technology the Chromar 7 had promised Earth could change everything. It could be the key to saving his planet. But no matter how hard he tried, Jack couldn't stop thinking about her. It wasn't just her beauty. It was something more, something he couldn't name. The way she spoke to him, the way she seemed to understand him in ways no one else did. He had never felt this way before, and it terrified him. On the 9th day, Jack found himself in the mess hall, eating a meal alone. His mind was elsewhere, his thoughts scattered. He wasn't paying attention to the food in front of him, but to the quiet hum of the station and the sound of footsteps approaching. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. He had become so attuned to Valera's presence that he could feel it before she even entered the room. "Captain Walker," she said softly, her voice smooth and soothing. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Jack finally looked up, locking eyes with her. She stood at the entrance of the room, her 6 eyes studying him intently. He couldn't read her expression, but there was something in the way she looked at him that made his heart race. "No, you're not disturbing me," Jack replied, though his voice betrayed the anxiety he felt. "I was just thinking." Valera smiled and walked toward him, her movements graceful as ever. She took a seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. "I can see that. You have a lot on your mind, don't you?" Jack nodded, unable to look away from her. "I do. There's a lot riding on this mission. The future of Earth, the future of humanity. It's all on my shoulders." Valera's gaze softened, and she reached out, touching his hand lightly. Her skin was warm, and the contact sent a ripple of sensation through his body. "You are not alone, Captain. You have your people, and you have me." Jack's breath caught in his throat. Her words were simple, but there was a weight to them. She didn't just mean she was there to help with the mission. There was something more, something intimate in the way she said it. "I don't know what to do with all of this," Jack admitted, his voice low. "The mission, the connection between us. It's confusing." Valera tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "You don't need to understand everything right now, Captain. Sometimes, things just happen. You can't control them." Her words sent a chill down Jack's spine. It was as if she was speaking from experience, as if she had been in his position before. But he couldn't focus on that now. The connection between them was too strong. It was pulling him in, and he didn't know if he could resist much longer. I don't know if I can separate this feeling from the mission, Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. Every time I'm near you, I forget about everything else. I forget about Earth, about my crew. It's like you're all I can think about. Valera's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. I don't want you to forget about your mission, Captain. But I also don't want you to fight what's happening between us. It's real. I can feel it. And I know you can too. Jack's pulse quickened. She was right. He couldn't deny it anymore. Every time they were near each other, the attraction was undeniable. But he was torn. His duty to Earth, his responsibility as a leader, was what had always defined him. But now Valera was making him question everything. I can't keep doing this, Jack murmured, his hand trembling slightly as he pulled it away from hers. I'm supposed to be a soldier, a leader. I can't afford distractions. Valera's expression didn't change. She didn't seem angry or upset. Instead, she looked at him with understanding, almost as if she had expected him to say it. I know what you're thinking, Captain. You think you're betraying your mission. But sometimes the mission isn't just about technology or strategy. It's about understanding, about seeing the bigger picture. Jack stared at her, struggling to find the right words. The way she spoke to him, the way she made him feel, it was like a fire that he couldn't put out, but he didn't know how to let it burn. You're right, Jack said quietly, his voice almost lost in the silence of the room. I've spent so much time trying to focus on the bigger picture that I've forgotten what it means to feel. Valera leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked onto his. And what does it feel like, Captain? To feel? Jack swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wasn't sure if he could say it out loud, but Valera was waiting, her gaze unwavering. She wanted to know. She wanted to understand him in a way no one ever had. It feels like being torn between two worlds, Jack confessed. It feels like wanting something, but not knowing if it's the right thing. It feels like desire. Valera's lips parted in surprise, and for a moment, the air between them seemed to grow thick. Then, slowly, she smiled again. That is the first step, Captain. The first step toward understanding. Jack didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what this connection with Valera meant. But in that moment, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to be able to walk away from it. Not anymore. The fire between them was only growing stronger, and Jack knew that sooner or later they would both have to face it. The question was, would he be ready when that moment came? The tension between Jack and Valera had become impossible to ignore. Every day, every moment spent on Cromer 7, Jack felt the pull between them growing stronger. The mission was still important, still vital for the future of Earth. But now, there was something else. Something that neither of them could deny anymore. Jack's mind was in a constant state of turmoil. He would wake up thinking about Valera, and go to sleep with the same thoughts lingering in his mind. It wasn't just her beauty anymore. It was everything about her. The way she understood him in ways no one else could, the way she seemed to see through his walls. She was a mystery, an enigma, and she had burrowed her way into his thoughts, making it harder and harder to focus on anything else. He knew he couldn't keep pretending this was just about the mission. The line between duty and desire had blurred beyond recognition, and he didn't know where to go from here. It was late one night when Jack found himself alone in the observation room again, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. The stars twinkled quietly in the distance, indifferent to the chaos inside him. He was deep in thought, replaying every conversation he'd had with Valera, every look they'd shared. It was clear now. There was more to their connection than just physical attraction. It was something deeper, something neither of them could define. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him, and Jack didn't need to look over his shoulder to know who it was. He had come to recognize the subtle way Valera moved, the way her presence seemed to fill the room without a sound. "Captain," she said softly, her voice a mixture of warmth and concern. "I've been looking for you." Jack turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. The look on her face was unreadable, but he could feel the tension in the air between them. This was it, the moment he had been dreading, the moment he would have to make a choice. "Valera," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "We need to talk." Her 6 eyes studied him, and for a moment, Jack saw a flicker of something vulnerable in her expression. She nodded slowly, walking over to where he stood. "I think we do." They stood in silence for a moment, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Jack knew that he couldn't keep running from this. He had to confront what was happening between them. And he had to do it now. "I can't keep pretending this isn't affecting me," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't keep pretending that this," he gestured between them, "doesn't mean something." Valera's gaze softened, and she took a step closer, her hand brushing against his arm. The touch sent a wave of warmth through his body. "I know," she said quietly. "I feel it too." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment when everything would change. He could feel it in the air, the weight of the choice pressing down on him. "I'm torn, Valera," Jack confessed, his voice almost a whisper. "I'm torn between my duty to Earth and what I feel for you. I don't know how to reconcile the two." Valera looked at him with an intensity that made his breath catch in his throat. "You don't have to. You don't have to choose between them. The mission, your duty, it's important. I understand that. But what we have, it's real, Captain. And sometimes you have to trust that what's real is worth the risk." Jack's mind raced as he processed her words. He had always been taught to prioritize his mission, to put his duty first. That was what it meant to be a soldier, to be a leader. But what Valera was saying, what she was offering, was something Jack had never considered before. Was it possible to have both? Could he still fulfill his duty to Earth and explore what was happening between him and Valera? He took a deep breath, looking out at the stars once more. His mind was a whirl of conflicting thoughts. But as he stood there, with Valera so close, he realized something. The mission wasn't just about technology or strategy. It was about people. It was about making choices that would affect the future of his species. And sometimes, those choices didn't have easy answers. "I've always been about duty," Jack said slowly. "I've always believed that the mission comes first. But maybe I've been wrong. Maybe there's more to life than just following orders." Valera's expression softened, and she placed a hand gently on his chest. "It's not easy, Captain. I know that. But sometimes the hardest choices lead to the greatest rewards." Jack met her gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. "And if I choose you? If I choose us?" Valera smiled, the warmth in her eyes undeniable. "Then we choose together. And we'll face whatever comes next, together." Jack's mind was still racing, but the uncertainty he had felt moments before was fading. For the first time since arriving on Chromar 7, he felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about duty or desire. It was about trust. Trust in himself, in Valera, and in the connection they shared. "I don't know what the future holds," Jack said, his voice firm. "But I know this. I don't want to face it alone." Valera's eyes glistened with emotion. She reached out, pulling him into a gentle embrace. "You won't have to," she whispered. As they stood there, in the quiet of the observation room, Jack knew that this was the moment everything had changed. He had made his choice, not just for Earth, but for himself. And whatever the future held, he was ready to face it, with Valera by his side. The stars outside continued to shine, distant and cold. But inside, Jack felt a warmth that would carry him through whatever came next. He had crossed a line, but in doing so, he had found something worth fighting for. And for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace.